Hey everybody, welcome to the Outdoor Places program public meeting. We're really excited to have you here and talk about this meeting or this project with you. We have an awesome project team that we'll do introductions for in a second. But first item is that we do have Spanish interpretation available if needed. So Lucia is our awesome interpreter. And if you want to switch over to that channel, you can go to the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and you should see Spanish listed there, so you can switch over.
Hola, me llamo Lucía, voy a ser su intérprete para hoy. Si necesita interpretación en español, puede ir al icono de globo que está abajo de la pantalla y hacer clic y así te manda en lo que es un cuarto de español donde ahí yo voy a estar traduciendo simultáneamente esta junta.
Great. Okay, Lucia, you should be in the Spanish channel, and anybody that wants to switch over should be able to do so now. Awesome. Okay, just a couple housekeeping items. If you are joining us by phone and you want to raise your hand for a question or a comment, you can press *9 to do so, and we'll see that pop up on our end. And then if you have questions during the webinar in the meeting at all, you can type in the Q&A chat box, which you should see at the bottom of your screen. So it says Q&A and has the little chat bubbles in it. We will do a question and answer period at the end, so know that your questions will be answered, and just put them in there. And then if you're having any technical difficulties, you can use the chat function and we'll help you out with that. So we're going to go through a bunch of information today. The first one being introductions of the project team. We will do a background on the whole project and the program overview, and then we'll dive into the 3 different types of patios that we are having in Denver. The first being above curb patios, second being private property patios, and the third being below curb patios. And then we will do a question and answer period. So we'd like to welcome you to the project team. If we would just want to go around and do some intros. So Brad, you can kick that off.
Sorry about that. Trying to share my camera. I'm Brad Johnson. I'm a planner and urban designer with Denver Community Planning and Development Department, and helping to co-manage this project alongside some of our other agency partners at the city.
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Jay Decker. I manage the Department of Transportation Infrastructure's Office of Innovation, and I am one of the project managers for this project.
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Justin Rinaldi. I was formerly the program or the navigator for the temporary program, and I will be taking on the role of program administrator for the Outdoor Places program. So thank you all for being here.
My name is Kristen Brando. I'm also a planner and urban designer working with Brad in the Department of Community Planning and Development. Thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Lisa Childress. I'm also a member of the project team on the CPD side.
My name is Rachel Roberts. I'm the project manager on the consultant side, and I work for Consor, and I'm a transportation planner. Jenny?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Godwin, also with Consor as a transportation planner supporting engagement outreach for the project.
Arlene, I think she's in here as an attendee, so I'll just introduce her. Arlene is our economic analysis lead, and she is with Arland.
I'm Nora Newwriter with NHN Consulting, supporting the team with public engagement.
Hello, and I'm Meredith Winskoski with Livable Cities Studio, supporting the team, urban design and planning.
Great, thanks everyone. Now I'll hand it over to Jay to do a project background.
Wonderful. So excited to be able to kick this off with you and on this lovely day. So next slide, we'll kind of get into some of the project background here. Just kind of taking us back a couple of years, really where this program came from is due to COVID and some of the stay-at-home orders we had and food and dining limits. We saw that our food and beverage industry was really struggling, frankly, teetering on completely, going out of business across the board. And so what Denver did, very similar to what other cities across the nation and our region did, is they eased regulations to give businesses the ability to perform food and dining service outdoors. So some of that took place within the right of way, which is, just a technical term that basically means by the sidewalk or in the street. But then also there were some relaxed zoning regulations that allowed those folks to also expand onto private property, like parking lots, for example. Throughout that, temporary program, it ran until October of 2022. Overall was really well received. At the height of all of our permits, I think we had close to 350 individual businesses that were actually out there and having food and dining service. But as we've gotten a little bit better related to COVID, and there's been turnover in the industry, we've probably actually whittled that down to closer to 100. And so really what's left right now are some of the really well loved and well cared for outdoor dining establishments. And so we've been able to kind of learn from those and then move towards making the actual formal program. Next slide. Over the course of the temporary program, it was almost kind of like a living lab or a pilot of sorts, where we had to, move quickly and relax regulations to let businesses survive during that period, which really gave us the opportunity to learn from that temporary program. And really what we learned is, for the most part, they were really well received. And then functioned really well. And overall, residents and businesses seem to really enjoy them. And so that's where our Mayor Hancock, a couple of years ago, really asked for us to come together as a city and figure out how to make this a formal program. Something with more improvements to it can be something that is a permanent fixture on Denver streets and on private property here and into the future. It's very similar to what other mayors have been doing around the nation as well. It's been really successful. People really enjoy eating outdoors, especially in areas like Denver, where we do have a really great climate for a good portions of the year. And so we're really looking forward to working with you to actually establish this program and put the necessary guardrails around it to make sure the permanent version is done very well. Next slide. But like I said, while well received, there were some key issues. And the benefit of having the temporary version out there is we really got to learn from that, which means we'll be able to hit the ground running for the permanent program and really make sure we have thought of everything. And there isn't something that's necessarily overlooked. And so some of the big things that we have seen, and certainly this isn't an exhaustive list, but it's some of them, a lot of them were related to accessibility. So having the ability to maintain that dedicated space for people walking or rolling, making sure that is maintained, since that is a priority, especially at the sidewalk level. But a few other things that we noticed were related to design quality, maybe not the most robust or most attractive materials, which is understandable given that it was a temporary program. But now that we are creating a formal program, we want to make sure that we do have a nicer quality touch there and is representative of the neighborhoods that they're in. And then other things related to, safety, enforcement, making sure that these don't migrate into the sidewalk and kind of things like that. And then also, frankly, neighborhood impacts. So making sure that they are a good fit in the neighborhoods that they are located. And there isn't any issues related to them for when we permit them in the formal program. Next slide. And really where we've landed as a city is our vision statement. And this is what's been guiding us through the process as we develop this permanent program. And our vision statement is relatively simple. It's that our Outdoor Places program will be an efficient, accessible, and equitable program that allows the community to activate streets and private property with safe and vibrant spaces that contribute to Denver's great neighborhoods.
All right, thanks, Jay. So now I'm going to do a program overview for what we're working on in this project. So you'll see in the image on the screen that we have 3-ish types of patios in the city. So the first one being above curb patios. So those are the yellow ones in the bottom left corner. Those are going to be the patios that are closer right up against the building. And then we have below curb patios, which are what you may typically think of as parklets or full street closures. So they're taking up the right of way where vehicles and other modes of transportation usually are. And then the third one being private property. So that one's kind of self-explanatory. It's on the private property of different property owners. And so we're coming up with different rules and regulations and design guidelines for each of these three types. Okay, as far as the project scope for what we're working on right now, as you can tell, we are doing community and stakeholder engagement. So this is the first community meeting that we're having for this project, but you may have been involved with the public survey that we did in November, which I'll review the results of here in a few slides. And then we also have an awesome stakeholder working group and have been doing focus groups with this project as well. In addition to that, we are doing a program evaluation of the temporary program. And then we are doing a lot of analysis, economic analysis, fee analysis, things like that. And then researching with different peer cities across the nation and the Front Range to find best practices for the Denver program. And then in addition to that, we are doing program development to really bring together all of these pieces, define those design guidelines, update any regulations that need to be updated for these to exist. And right now we're really focusing on private property and below curb. And then once all of that is done, we'll start up the program. So as far as where we are in the schedule, we are finishing up private property. You may have seen that the draft documents are available for public review. So if you haven't looked at those yet, I highly encourage you to do that. And Meredith will be going into more detail about what is in those documents after this. And then we will be starting below curb here soon. So we're just starting some of those conversations. As far as the public survey that you may have taken in November, we had almost 1,000 survey respondents. The respondents visited the patios pretty frequently, like between 1 and 4 times a month. They found the patios very effective and a very positive impact to the community. And 85% of people said that they were more likely to visit an establishment if it had an outdoor patio, which is awesome. Some of the top responses that we heard about what people liked most about outdoor patios were that they enjoyed the weather and people watching. They liked that it reduced their exposure to COVID by being outdoors. They felt a deeper sense of community and really engaging with the neighborhood. They also enjoyed reduced traffic and reclaiming space from cars for people. And then we heard a lot about dog-friendly spaces, which is probably not surprising considering we're in Denver. As far as what can be changed to improve outdoor places, we heard that people want better protection from vehicles. They want to ensure ADA accessibility, which is a big component of this project. They want to restrict more cars and have more full street closures. They want better design, more permanent design, and then ensuring that sidewalks and bike lanes are not blocked by these patios. Some concerns that we heard about, in addition to what I just went over, were safety, pedestrian access, ADA access, and bike parking. There were also concerns and just an emphasis that we should be coordinating with the Shared Streets program, which we definitely are. Jay is the project manager for that program. Also considering how commercial uses are used in public spaces and making sure that we're keeping public spaces welcoming for all with that. Making sure that we are activating neighborhoods, and then considering lighting, shade, landscaping, and weather protection. And then we heard from business owners and the public that the application process needs to be user-friendly and easier, and that the public is willing to see piloted ideas. So I'll hand it to Brad now to go over above curb patios.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. So yeah, this is the first component of the program that we jumped in to work on. And so just as a reminder, as Rachel was saying earlier on a slide, the above curb patios, what we define that as is a patio that's fully within the right of way and sitting kind of between the curb and the private property line. So this is one of the examples at Levendale that we saw in the Golden Triangle that came along during the pandemic. Next slide. And so one of the reasons we started this work first and began it really back in the fall of 2022 and worked very diligently on it first was that our sidewalks are critical for mobility, especially for persons with disabilities to get around our city. It's so critical. And as we know, the number one priority for sidewalk space is to be a sidewalk, right? For people to be able to move along that space. And there were certainly some patios that appeared to be encroaching maybe on that space or making it hard for people to get by. And so we wanted to hit that one first. We do have, we are in the process now of opening that component of the program. We've got the materials and guidelines up on the website already, and we're opening that program for applications. So if somebody was permitted under the temporary program, they are free to apply to come into the Outdoor Places program now, again, just for the above curb component of the program. We did open that application period near the end of February, and we are requiring that applicants that are in the temporary program and are within this above curb space send in their application to the program by the end of April of this year. Next. And so to go along with this above curb component, we established what we call the Outdoor Places program requirements, and that includes information about the process that you need to go through to apply, different types of agencies that will be required to review certain patios in certain locations or with certain characteristics. It touches on design, accessibility for persons with disabilities, and many other aspects. Some of the big moves are that we've been able to make new opportunities, more flexibility for where above curb patios can be placed, and also the design of those patios. So trying to promote additional creative options for our business community.
Great. Now I'll hand it off to Meredith to talk about private property patios. And then just a quick plug again for the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I see we have a couple comments in there that we'll address at the end.
Great, thanks, Rachel. So yeah, kind of moving on to private patios on private property. I want to share with you all kind of what we actually have up for public review right now on the website, but I'll kind of give you an overview the next handful of slides, and there's definitely more information to dig into. So as we have been working on these, there's a handful of objectives that have really been kind of guiding the work, making sure we're aligned with these. First, being economic development and business support, trying to make sure we have gathering space options for a variety of business types, reducing those barriers and really streamlining the review process, something we've heard a lot about, and that's important to us. So is placemaking and neighborhood integration. So, mitigating the impacts on sensitive uses, thinking about, though, also activating our streets and public ways, ensuring social gathering areas, and then making sure that we have design excellence, really high quality and durable materials within our patios. And lastly, but certainly not least, safety, really thinking about how we design these spaces and these patios to really mitigate any potential conflicts between those using patios, cars, and pedestrians as well. So we have been looking at a range of patio types, and so I want to give you an overview here of the three different types that we've kind of been thinking about here. The one on the left we're calling not visible. These are the patios that are typically in the back of an establishment or hidden from view, and generally speaking, they are accessed through the establishment itself. So really not contributing to our streets, activation of our streets, and our public ways. These are kind of in the back or tucked away behind the establishment. The second one is internal, and these are generally on larger sites where there might be kind of internal parking, sometimes more kind of suburban type sites. but not necessarily, where the patios are just kind of activating some sort of internal space. The image in the middle is more of a kind of has more suburban characteristics with surface parking outside of it. But the patio, again, activating internally. The one that you're probably most familiar with is the ones that are public oriented, and that's type 3 on the right. This is Marzix on 17th, and you can see how the patio there, it's actually on private property, but then it activates the street and kind of creating that vibrancy. So going through a handful of updates that we have developed so far. You know, the first bullet there is just allowing patios accessory to all non-residential uses. And right now, it's to eating and drinking establishments only. And so, you know, the idea of expanding this so that all non-residential uses could have these patios is what we're going for here. The top image here is you can see the establishment in the back of the tattoo shop, and there's an umbrella out front, and they have a little bit of seating, and it essentially kind of serves as just a gathering waiting area. And so these changes would allow businesses like that to have outdoor private patios. Secondly, allowing non-contiguous patio placement. So currently, the patio must be contiguous to the establishment itself. This gives a little bit more flexibility in where the patio can be placed within the site. The delineation requirements. This really has to do with the delineation element, and essentially kind of that fencing that goes around a lot of these patios. And this proposes to eliminate that requirement. So the image there on the bottom left, you can see that patio space outside and how there's no delineating element around it. And then generally to allow internal patios more design flexibility. So these are those type 1 patios, right? And the type 2, the ones that are not really contributing right to the public ways in our streets, and because you're not seeing them, giving them a little bit more design flexibility. Next. One other update I wanted to share with you all was the requirements for those patios that are within 50 feet of a protected district. So, for example, single family residential. Currently, those patios have to go through the Zoning Board of Adjustment approval, and that's a public hearing. There's also a CPD staff review and notification of neighbors. We have done some digging into this to really understand how effective that process is, because one of our goals has been to streamline the process and really make it a lot more efficient, but make sure we're doing all the right things as we move through the process. We found that only one patio was denied by the Board of Adjustment, but this denial was consistent with community planning and development's recommendation as well. And so generally what we found that the Board of Adjustment decisions are typically less restrictive than CPD. So our proposed update is to remove the Board of Adjustment requirement for patios within 50 feet of the protected district. Still would have notification, CPD review and approval, but then using the Board of Adjustment process so that applicants could potentially appeal if they wanted to. The other piece that we have worked on and that you will see on our website is this path for optional design review path for private property patios. Mouthful. And so this list of elements we've included in the design guidelines really focused on kind of high quality design and placemaking, discusses patio location, integration, the delineating elements that I spoke to a minute ago, materials, landscape, art, structures that are covering the patio, surface materials, and so on and so forth. So it gives guidance on all of these elements. If you want to go to the next. And what this does, like I said, it really is focused on an elevating placemaking and the enhancement of our public realm and semi-public realm. So essentially, we have kind of three ways to use these design guidelines. The first is voluntary, right? If somebody is doing a private patio and they want a resource for design, how to do it, kind of those best practices and guidance, they can use the guidelines voluntarily. The others are more of an incentive to use them, and one is through the desire for more administrative administrative flexibility from zoning standards, essentially. So, if there's something in zoning that can't quite be met, using the design guidelines would provide some flexibility from zoning through this administrative process. But, those people must meet the intent of the zoning and the design guidelines. And the last is parking displacement. And I'll get into this in a few more slides. But for those patios that displace parking on their site, we have some strategies there as well. So the participation in the design review, so just touching on this one around administrative flexibility. This is an example, these at the Denver Art Museum, these images here you can see on the screen. This overhead kind of canopy structure didn't meet the requirements within zoning. And so they actually had to seek a variance for this cover element that you can see. But if these were in place, what we're proposing here tonight, and there was this design review path, flexibility could be granted administratively if the patio went through the design review process, followed the design guidelines, and also met the intent of zoning, right? So you can see here how the flexibility could be granted, through the zoning or through utilizing the design guidelines. And a little bit about parking here. So as you all probably know, a lot of these patios that are on private property are utilizing parking. And the image that you can see on the screen is what was Tag Burger Bar. And that patio takes over a number of parking spaces in front of the establishment. And so by participating in the design review process and utilizing the design guidelines, there would be a certain amount of parking that could be displaced through this process. And really there are kind of two ways that this could happen. And one is for kind of smaller establishments or smaller parking lots. Up to 5 off-street parking spaces could be displaced. The other way to look at this is having a maximum percentage of parking to be displaced. It's really whichever is greater. The image, the little diagrams there on the bottom right are really kind of explaining this concept where in zone districts like the Main Street district compared to the suburban on the far right, the percentage for a Main Street district of displacement could be greater than the percentage in the suburban district. So you can see how in suburban areas where we typically need more parking, there would be less of a displacement impact than in some of our more urban districts where there might be a little bit more parking displacement. So really trying to kind of calibrate this percentage to the zone district and the context. A few just things to note here is that the accessible parking cannot be displaced in this scenario or through this design review process. And then if it's a multi-tenant property, there would be landlord approval required. And so, like I said, there's a strategy document and the design guidelines up on the website. So if you all want to dig into those more, feel free to jump on the website and go dig into them. And we'd also love to hear more about what you think about some of these ideas. So share your thoughts tonight, but please also jump on the website. You can see the website up top, submit some comments and share your thoughts with us.
Thank you, Meredith. I'm dropping the link in the chat now to that comment form. So if you want to review after this meeting, you can review those documents and submit a formal comment. Okay, now I'm going to hand it back to Jay to talk about below curb patios.
Thanks, Rachel and Meredith. So yeah, we wanted to kind of close out that topologies to talk about below curb patios. And so that's really just a technical city phrase to say things that are in the street. So they're below the sidewalk, as you can kind of see in the photo to the right. Next slide. When we're talking about below curb patios, there's really two distinct types that we wanted to take a second to talk about. The one on the left, some of you may have seen this. This is a full street closure that's located on Larimer Street between 29th and 30th in Rhino. And so this is an example where it's not an individual business, it's actually a collection of businesses on the block have been permitted to close that whole block down and then use that space with some guidance from the city. And of course, as we move through the process of establishing the formal program, those full street closures will have the opportunity to apply to continue that in a formal fashion. There is going to be a much higher set of circumstances that they will have to meet to continue past 2023. So the temporary ones will end this year. And if there are any that are permitted to continue in the future, they will have much higher urban design standards. We'll have had them completed mobility studies so we understand any traffic implications, parking implications, deliveries, bus issues, issues related to bikes or peds, things like that. And in addition to that, we will have a comprehensive community outreach process as well. So they'll have to actively reach out to the surrounding neighborhood to make sure it's something that collectively the neighborhood does want to move forward with. And on the other side, we do have another side of below curb that we're calling curbside. And so a good way to think of this is where there was previously a parking spot adjacent to the curb. There is now a patio in 1, 2, or however many parking spots in that place. And so those are the differences between those. Next slide. Similar to the other two typologies that we talked about, below curb is great, but it's not without its issues. So some of the things that we will be working on heading into the summer to get these guidelines completed is a number of things. The first one is related to location. And so when we're talking about location, we're really talking about what street that they're actually on. So you can see this example right here. This is located in Uptown. This is a really slow speed street. It doesn't have a lot of traffic on it. And so this is a location, while it wouldn't look like this at all in a formal fashion moving forward, you can see there aren't heavy barricades that are required for this location. And that's because it's more of a quiet neighborhood street. Whereas a couple slides ago, where we saw a location in front of the Cherry Cricket on Blake, closer to downtown, that is a faster moving street with much more traffic. And so we would want to mandate that there are barricades out there that are going to be much more robust if a car does actually hit them, just because of the conflict points there. There's other things we have to talk about as well related to like scale. So how far can they stick out from the curb? How long can they be? Is it just restricted to one space? Can they go to 3? What happens if one business is the entire block? Could they take the whole block? There's a variety of things that we have to consider there. And then, really related to design and safety, some of these really aren't ADA accessible at all. So we need to work through some of the impacts of that. A lot of it's going to come down to kind of where are they located. So if they're located near the intersection, there'll be an accessible ADA ramp that they could get down there. If not, potentially that will require them to kind of be at the curb level, so everything would be flush, or incorporate some sort of ADA accessible ramp system to make sure it works and it works for everyone. And then, of course, related to emergency access, that's a really big one, more so for the full street closures. Making sure that the fire department, any emergency services, police department can access those streets as quickly as possible in case there is an emergency. So as far as kind of what's next, really where we're putting a lot of our effort into once private property here gets wrapped up is working on the below curb patios this spring going into summer. And so we're going to have a lot of opportunities for folks on this call and others to participate. So we'll have continue working with our stakeholders and our stakeholder working groups. We have business focused groups as well that kind of understand their needs. And then we'll also be able to come back to a similar meeting like this from a citywide perspective and actually give you an update on kind of the detailed specifications of what below curb looks like. And of course, gather your comments at that point to see if we need to make any changes. And there will be an opportunity for the text version to be reviewed and comments provided by the public as well before the rules get finalized, probably sometime the end of summer.
Great. Thanks, Jay. Now we're going to pop into the question and answer portion, which Nora is going to facilitate. If you have thought of any questions in the past few minutes, feel free to pop them in the Q&A function in the bottom of your screen.
So we have some comments in the chat and we have some questions in Q&A, and we're going to try and get to as many as we possibly can. The first is from Wade, who asks, if there is evidence of intrusion into a neighborhood that impacts the quality of life in a neighborhood from a patio, how will that be addressed through this program? How do you manage that interaction between outdoor patios, commercial spaces, and neighborhood spaces? That might be a question for Brad.
Yeah, I can start, and Justin or others obviously feel free to add in here. So thanks, Wade, for the question. So a few ways. So for one, as we go forward, we're not going to be in this kind of Wild West environment that we've been in during the pandemic, where we were in that place, as you know, because we were in a crisis and our businesses were facing unprecedented tough times with the capacity limits. And so going forward, the recommendations that we're considering here would be mechanized through zoning changes. And so if you wanted to do a patio near a neighborhood, then you would have to, or anywhere for that matter, you would have to come in and get a formal zoning permit through the city, through a review process. And if that patio happened to be within 50 feet of what we call a protected district, so Meredith mentioned this, but it's usually like a single family neighborhood, single family zoning, or like 2-unit zoning, or even row house zoning. Those patios that are proposed within 50 feet of those types of districts have to go through a special review process. There has to be public notification. Neighbors would hear about it from that process and then could provide input to the zoning administrator, which they will in turn use to make decisions about whether the patio would even be allowed, and if so, what limitations might be placed on it. For example, how late it can operate. Like, say they could say it can't operate past 9 p.m. or something like that. So those are the ways, the key ways that we would address kind of neighborhood interface of a patio with a neighborhood like that.
Wade actually has a related question, which is, how are multi-business, are buildings that are mixed residential and multi-business treated in this kind of a scenario?
Multi-tenant business or multi-tenant properties, is that what we're talking about, you think? Well, so zoning permits are issued for zone lots, and I know that's kind of technical stuff, but that's how we look at sites when we review zoning permits, what's proposed on the zone lot. And so something could be proposed by an individual tenant or by multiple tenants, like something related to a parking lot that's shared by multiple tenants, and it would be reviewed for that zone lot. I don't know if there's a more specific question in there about the multi-tenant relationship, but if you could put it in the chat, or I know Wade, we're going to be setting up a meeting soon, so we could also follow up on it there.
Okay. Kenneth asks, are there limits to the total size of an establishment plus a private patio? In other words, if the patio increases the size of the business by a certain percentage, is there an automatic review that is triggered? And how do liquor licenses factor into that process?
So what will trigger a special review, and hi Ken, is if the patio, and this is the case with above curb as well as a patio on private property as we're looking at it. If the patio proposes a number of seats that would increase the seating occupancy above what's already permitted by greater than 20%, that would trigger a review by our building department and also by our, this is another technical term, but our sewer use and drainage permit team. And the reason for that is for the building department, a business can expand, but they need to be able to have the facilities, plumbing facilities, bathroom fixtures, toilets, etc., to serve increased capacity. And so, so that trigger could happen. And regardless of what we do in the zoning, if we make it easier for businesses to expand, which I think we are trying to do in most cases here, it could be that they'd still be limited because, or need to expand their plumbing fixtures to meet capacity loads that would be presented by additional space in a patio. On the other element that I mentioned, that sewer use and drainage permit, that's actually related to businesses maybe that are cooking food, and so they have, again, kind of technical, but they have what they call our grease interceptors that remove grease from water that's draining out of that restaurant before it goes into other places. And so those are very expensive mechanisms. And so if a business was expanding its food preparation capacity in a way to serve an outdoor patio, that would trigger an expansion of their grease interceptor capacity, that would be another limiting factor potentially, depending on the size of the patio. Sorry for that kind of long technical answer, but hopefully it helped.
I know that Lanny got an answer to this in the question and answer box, but it's some of these I'm going to read back out loud because I think it's worth getting for those who didn't get to read it. There's a lot of desire to make the application process easier. How are you going to accomplish this? Is there a goal regarding timeline for applications, how quickly they will be reviewed and granted?
You want to start on that one, Justin? If not,
like looking to unmute, and I still feel like I'm in Teams. Sorry, my apologies. I did type an answer back, and I basically said, you know, we agree with you. So the application process for the temporary program was clunky at best, similar to the application process before the temporary program. So we took note of that, and we did develop an entirely new application process with an entirely new application type. And the main point I want to get across with this new application type is that it kind of it puts everything under one umbrella. So nothing's missed. It coordinates reviews with all the different agencies that may be involved in a patio and permitting a patio, and in hopes that we can sort of make sure that we're not missing anything, and that we kind of streamline that process, and that any issues are communicated with the applicant right away. So as far as timeline goes, 30 days was kind of mentioned as sort of like the longest one. For patios, that are of simpler design, probably be, pretty quick review. But yeah, we're still sort of developing a process for that. You looks like you have something to say, Brad. Do you want to add to that? No? Okay. But that's basically the gist of what I typed in the answer.
Thanks, Justin. Back to quality of life and neighborhood notification. Gertie Grant asks, how do you define neighborhood notification? Some RNOs don't always do outreach, and businesses can't always be relied upon to follow through. How does the program intend to handle neighborhood notification? Lanny asks about the public outreach process, specifically the stakeholder working group and the focus groups, how those were put together, who's on them. Rachel or Jenny, would you like to take that on?
Jenny, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. Yeah, we started a process of working internally and externally, both to understand who our necessary stakeholders were to ensure that we were hearing from everyone we should be. In terms of the business focus groups, we broke it down into 3 categories. So small business, businesses that may have been historically unfortunately underrepresented in outreach processes in the past, and then kind of a larger size businesses, and then a community-oriented focus group that would be more attuned to neighborhood interests, that sort of thing. So we did basically an outreach process where we worked with those folks to understand their availability and began scheduling those working groups just sort of like this over Zoom virtually, and we're able to gather some really great feedback that has shaped the rest of the process through that. And the stakeholder working group was sort of a representation of some broader interests outside of sort of the business focus to understand what we might be needing to think about at kind of a higher level. So both of those groups we continue to meet with, and certainly have been very impactful in terms of developing the guidelines and hearing feedback as we are tonight that helps us understand next steps and our general trajectory.
Thanks, Jenny. We have a question from somebody who would like a site for the where in the zoning code these rule changes will appear. The website isn't easy enough to navigate in order to make those comments. Is there any way that we can help people interested in making comments understand exactly where the language is in the zoning code so that they can access it and understand it?
Well, understanding zoning is a challenge, I will admit. And so I guess what I would offer is that if anyone is interested in, a conversation to go through the details of the zoning changes, I'd be happy. Our door is open. You can contact us, and we'd be willing to set up an individual meeting to walk through that. The way that we formatted the zoning change is the proposed zoning changes is in what we call like a strikeout underline document. It is on the website, but and so what you would do there is when you open that document, you will see the pages that are being recommended to be changed with this text amendment. And so if we're removing a section of code, it'll be struck out. And if we're adding a section of code or zoning provisions, they'll be as underlined. And so that document is available on the website. So that's the best way to do it. But the other thing you can do is if you don't want to read the messiness of a zoning ordinance, which I wouldn't blame you if you didn't want to, the best place to get the big picture of what's being recommended beyond the presentation that Meredith just gave is what we call the strategy report. and that's also available. It discusses all the recommendations that are in the zoning code, but in a more user-friendly way that hopefully is a little bit more approachable. So that document's also there, and that'd be a good thing to look at to get the gist of it as well.
Thanks, Brad. Kevin has a very specific question. Will cooking or beverage service, including alcoholic beverages, be allowed on private property patios?
Service, yes, absolutely. Service of food or beverages, either one, including alcohol. Of course, they have to get their liquor license to do that, so it's not just an automatic approval or anything like that. They have to go through a process to do that. They have to develop what's called a liquor control plan. So there's a lot of oversight when it relates to alcohol, generally speaking. And then as far as the outdoor cooking stuff, we got that question a couple of times, and the answer is no, that you can't, that this permit anyway would only permit places for people to hang out, patios for people to be served at and eat at, but not outdoor cooking like that. So if you wanted to do that, that would be a separate permit that would have to be applied for to allow that type of thing to happen.
Wade has a question about parking. Has a parking impact study been done? And in terms of its impact on quality of life, when parking spaces are lost, particularly it seems like in high density locations.
Yeah, it's a really great, yeah, I'm happy to take that. It's a really good question, Wade, and I'm glad you brought it up. An overall citywide parking analysis has not been completed to see where there necessarily is a high volume or versus a low volume where some of these are going to be allowed. It's important to note that any parking outside of private property is public parking. And so it's not necessarily the businesses parking, although some folks like to use that sort of language. So it's important to note that, you know, it's really for all of us, depending on kind of who lives in the neighborhood or, you know, how they're coming and going in the area. When it comes to Dottie's goals, what was established in Blueprint Denver, and then right now Denver Moves Everyone, which are big citywide master plans on what Denver's goals and feelings are after they've met with, you know, thousands upon thousands of people, is that we prioritize pedestrians, bicyclists, deliveries, and then cars at the bottom list. And so the idea behind many of these outdoor patios that may or may not take up some parking spaces is that generally speaking, we prioritize people first places. It's not something that we've always done historically as a city, but it's something that we're changing our tune on as we grow and evolve and we get more diverse opinions. And so generally speaking, no, that won't be a requirement. It may be a requirement for, say, like a full street closure in an area that does have severely impacted parking as part of that mobility study. But some of that kind of one-off curbside parking or private property or things like that, it's not generally something that we're going to do or look into because we are going to prioritize those people for spaces over cars.
Thanks, Jay. Let's see. One of the questions that we have here actually has to do with one of the points made in the earlier slide, that these spaces are supposed to be for all to enjoy. But the mechanisms by which the city can share these spaces but at the same time prevent solicitation in those spaces. Has there been some thought put to how to manage those potential conflicts in terms of how those spaces are used, accessed?
Is there a little bit more definition by what you mean or what the
I think this person is specifically referring to to abuse, solicitation, and spaces where people are enjoying themselves by persons passing by.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so if I'm understanding, I'm in an outdoor patio. It's maybe it's on the sidewalk or adjacent to it in the street, and someone is walking by and particularly maybe saying some things that you don't appreciate or are unwanted. Is that kind of the question?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, first off, I'm sorry if that's ever happened to you. That sounds like a fairly specific question. So apologies. You know, that's never something anyone wants. Unsolicited feedback in that way. But with that, I mean, these spaces are in the public realm or are immediately adjacent to them for many of the private property ones. And so, you know, similar to sitting on a bench or being in a park, we do have neighbors that, you know, sometimes they do stuff like that. And so it's really not something that can be regulated or necessarily enforced unless it gets into some sort of risk or some sort of safety issue, which then you could get the police involved. Of course, you know, the actual business that's operating that space, they can assist you in those situations as well. But if you were located in a public space, that's unfortunately some of the downsides of being in a public space is opportunities like that to exist.
Thanks, Jay. Wade actually specifically asks about brew pubs. And has there been an analysis done of beer pubs, brew pubs, and how many are located in residential areas? And is this part of your analysis and consideration?
Yeah, I answered Wade's question. I just said that, you know, we had not distinguished the particular types of businesses that have patios aside from them just all being eating and drinking establishments. And as far as like identifying where brew pubs are, I was just saying I'm not aware of any sort of analysis of where that specifically locates brew pubs. But I don't know, maybe Wade, you could elaborate a little bit more on the question.
Yeah, I think the question is, I ask because the public may not recognize the actual number of patio participants which are breweries versus restaurants.
Yeah, and I don't know that we could, I mean, pinpoint specifically breweries. I mean, we could probably locate which ones have liquor licenses that are issued through the city. But we don't have that specific information available at this moment.
Thanks, Justin. There is a note in the chat, which a very thoughtful note from Chad regarding a definition in the text amendment. And Brad, I don't know if you want to, with regards to disabled persons, and Brad, you had an answer that you might want to share with others on the call regarding the content of that definition.
Yeah, regrettable reality of codes that obviously we still have adopted in our city that uses, I don't know what the right word is, discriminatory, derogatory, offensive language as it relates to persons with disabilities. And I talked about how we had a markup, strikeout, underline version of the code to show where we're proposing changes here. And it so happens that one of the pages that we are proposing a change to later on down that page in an area that we're not proposing to change, well, at least we weren't proposing to change before this was drawn to our attention, there is some of that offensive language. So Chad pointed that out and how hurtful and problematic that language is, and I couldn't agree more. And I think, I mean, Chad's been a great partner to us on this, and so have many other people in the disability community. So it's frankly embarrassing. And he asked me in the comments to look into it and see about trying to get it removed in coordination with our attorneys. And others, and I'll certainly push forward with that conversation, and we'll see what happens. And I'll continue talking to Chad about that as I have along the way in this process. So appreciate you flagging it though, because I didn't even honestly look down on that part of the page where we hadn't proposed a change. So that's what that was about.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. We have a question from Tori regarding the laws around smoking and vaping. Patrons tend to believe that they're allowed to partake because they are technically outdoors. What are the rules around smoking and vaping in those spaces?
Justin, I think you might know this better than me. I know that it's not something that we would regulate in the zoning code. If anything, it would be something through like our public health requirements and things like that. Justin, do you know any specifics on that?
Excuse me. I think it's sort of, from what I understand, from what I remember in discussions a while back when this was brought up, it had to do a lot more with sort of the business being culpable and enforcing that. I think there's a mechanism for folks to report these businesses, but I'm not sure how that's done. That's about all I know.
But so it is illegal to smoke on them, or we don't know?
I'm not exactly sure. I know that the city there's an ordinance that restricts smoking within a certain distance from the building. But as far as if you're away from that distance or in the patio space away from that distance, I'm not sure how that's enforced. But that's something that we could look into and kind of reach out to you and follow up on.
Thanks, Justin. There are a number of comments about how people are excited about this as a program going forward. We do have another question regarding maintenance and what these patios look like. How will the city ensure that well-loved, well-used patios are also well-maintained, not vandalized, and used for their intended purpose?
Yeah, I can jump in there. You know, it's a really good question. And I think a lot of what we've seen in the temporary version, certainly there's some fairly bad examples where it was pretty minimal effort to throw something out there. But that, you know, was kind of okay during the temporary program, right? It was kind of put together with minimal requirements to support the businesses. It's gone on a little bit longer as we transition to the permanent program. But really the idea is that we are taking everything involved with what you've seen out there and having a higher standard to then get approved to move into the formal program. And so we will have a higher caliber of quality for the materiality that needs to be out there. You know, we'll have, you know, the idea that you need to actually have nicer quality materials, so then they will withstand the elements longer and things like that. As it relates to kind of graffiti and things like that, unfortunately, it seems to be on the rise in Denver, and it can be very difficult to remove from certain things, you know, signs or building faces and things like that. Certainly can be expensive to replace some of those as well. And so, you know, kind of similar to a building, you know, I'm not sure if there's really anything we can do related to that, because it's technically a crime that has happened against that business. And so, you know, certainly if there's something that is just marred in graffiti and has a variety of issues, we would address that during their review process to be permitted for the next year if it is truly a detriment. But if they're just taking a little bit longer than maybe some of us would like to clean up some graffiti in some areas, I'm not really sure if that's really something that we can enforce, at least, you know, within the public right of way for some of the above curve or below curve elements.
Somewhat in the same space, we have a question from Kenneth asking, regarding use limitations, how are violations of use restrictions enforced? For example, temporary speakers when they might not be allowed in that space?
Typically they're complaint based. So someone sees something that they believe to be a violation, they submit a complaint for that, and then that complaint, depending on where it is, if it's in the right of way, then that complaint likely would be enforced by DOTI, since DOTI being the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, Jay's team, since they preside over the right of way. And if the complaint were to be made for an element on private property, then that would go to our zoning, neighborhood, and inspections services team, I believe that stands for, ZNIS. They would go out and investigate the complaint based on the code rules, and if they see a violation, then they can cite that like a correction order. I don't know the exact term, but starts probably with a warning of some kind, then elevates to fines that grow increasingly expensive over time if that activity doesn't stop.
Thanks, Brad. We do have a comment. So, while some cities like the outdoor places program, and it allows restaurants and servers to perhaps earn more, and it's good for the city. There's also been pushback, and this particular commenter actually put in a link to the New York Times and outdoor dining sheds in New York City. I don't know if this is an opportunity to mention the peer city research that's part of this program, and informing decisions going forward.
Well, I'll just say we are very aware of that. Our new chief urban designer at the city actually just left the city of New York, so she's even more well acquainted with what went on there. I think that did get pretty nasty out there, I have to say. Like, those sheds, as they called them, were out in the right of way, typically below the curb. So again, we aren't there yet in determining how those will be approached. But yeah, people were storing trash in there, and they were attracting rats and all kinds of rough stuff that we don't want to see happen here. And so we are looking at all those other kind of mistakes that other cities had for us already that we get to learn from. It's interesting. I mean, we didn't see that type of stuff happen in Denver even during the pandemic. We didn't see structures like that very often. There's one or two examples around the city. And so I don't know where we'll land on those types of enclosed structures, especially in the right of way. My guess, if I was betting on it, would be that we would not allow that type of enclosed structure out in the right of way, but we'll see when that conversation unfolds.
Well, I think we've answered the questions that were in the question and answer, and in the chat. Certainly, as we move towards closing our time together, we have another comment. Regarding maintaining cleanliness around these areas. There's a comment about people leaving dog poop on the ground, and treating these areas with respect. But certainly, if there are additional comments, please put them in the Q&A or the chat. I think we're probably coming close to our time together. I don't know if you want to wrap up a little bit. Rachel would like to answer that comment live.
Oh, that I was just marking it.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I think just to close this out, just wanted to point everyone to the program webpage again. I dropped this link in the chat a couple times, so you can refer there for any updates for the project. We'll continue updating this. Okay. Someone just asked for the program website again, so I dropped the link in the chat again, and you can see the link here. If you're having trouble accessing that, let me know.
Can we also point folks to office hours? There was a question from Gertie regarding office hours.